And we are back. Panelists here. Joshua Johnson, host of NPR's 1A, and now an NBC News contributor. Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report. NBC News political analyst Elise Jordan, and Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network, and an NBC News contributor. All right, I want to start the conversation for you guys off with just this Susan Glasser nugget from The New Yorker on Friday. Most experts I spoke with, she writes, Republican and Democrat alike, were resigned to Trump being outplayed by Putin, a view perhaps best summed up by a former State Department official. I'm afraid, he told me, that our guy here is like an amateur boxer going up against Muhammad Ali. Amy?
Well, we already heard from the ambassador that it's just a meeting, so it's not a summit already.
Hang on, we went from summit to meeting. At some point, he went down to detailed conversation.
Right. So already we know where this is. And let's face it, Putin has already won. It's not simply that the president's going over into his part of the world and having to sit down and one-on-one. But the fact is that after these indictments, what a president should be saying to everyone, not just to Putin, but to the American public writ large, Russia did this to divide us. Russia didn't do this simply to make sure somebody won and somebody lost. They did this to make sure that we lose trust in our political system and in our institutions. And that's not going to happen. We are America. We may be of different parties, we may have different views, but we are united in America, and that's what I'm going to go say to Vladimir Putin, that you cannot divide us, and he can't do that.
Hugh, why can't he?
I think he will. I actually have much more confidence in the president probably than anyone at this table because I take a long view. There have been 26 Soviet-American summits, 6 Russian-American summits.
Don't call it summit.
I know, but they call them whatever you want. The worst was Vienna in '61, but the second worst was President Obama in Seoul with Medvedev on the open mic in March of 2012 when he said, "Tell Vlad, give me some space." What happened after that? Snowden, Crimea, the fraught relationship the ambassador just referred to. We won't know for a year how this plays out. And I actually have much more confidence that Donald Trump will not be bullied and will not be seeking the approval of anyone because he doesn't seek the approval of anyone, ever.
But you could argue that the preconditions, though, that President Obama set up for Putin to feel empowered is exactly what Donald Trump is doing, though, by going into this meeting on Monday. You look at how Donald Trump, the theatrics before the meeting with Kim Jong-un, and how he threatened to, he canceled it, it was back on, and he definitely had the North Koreans sitting on the edge of their seat about would Donald Trump lend them that prestige by going to the table. Here, Donald Trump is forcing the issue against all of his top advisors. He's wanted to have this summit. They've tried to dissuade him. And there hasn't even been a principals committee meeting, as Susan Glasser reports in The New Yorker, to discuss what's on the agenda with Russia. So I just don't see how we can expect anything to come out of this and why Donald Trump is forcing the issue so much.
I think about that quote from Michelangelo, that our greatest danger may not be that we aim too high and we miss, but that we aim too low and we hit. Ambassador Huntsman may not be calling this a summit, but I just checked the home pages of Sputnik News and RT, and both of them do. So the Russians may be viewing this the way the world views this, with a little bit more alacrity. The president may be going into this to get what he wants, and he may very well get it. He may just want this meeting to be getting to know you meeting. We need to spend time with people who could possibly be our allies and our friends, and he may walk out of there getting everything he wants. And so might Vladimir Putin. Granted, it may not be as visible as the North Korea meeting where the world saw an image of them shaking hands, but I wonder if the larger risk is that both men could walk into the meeting, get what they wanted, and walk out thinking they're both winners.
I'm sorry. This is what the president's director of national intelligence said on Friday about Russia. Take a listen.
We know you run the shop. We know you're making the decisions. You can't pass it off to, oh, that's some hacker down somewhere where we don't know. We know what you do.
Presentation, he said a blinking red light, essentially comparing it to right before 9/11.
Right.
So the president's going to sit down and try to befriend somebody who Director Coates says is currently attacking the United States.
Well, and framing it like this, the way that the president has. One, Putin's not going to admit it, so why should I even ask him? And two, it happened under Obama's watch. Now, both of those things are true, but that's not the point. The point is not to say, well, did you do it? And then have him say, of course not. We don't do anything. We don't spy. It's to say, we know you did it. Look at how detailed we don't just know you do it. We know the names of the people where you're doing it.
We know they've been doing it. I was reminded last night at dinner by 2 veterans of the IC. 40 years ago anniversary, the Russians executed Georgy Markov in London with a ricin-tipped umbrella. They are the Russians. They have been the Russians since Stalin. They are the same people year in and year out, and Romney was right in 2012. I just think that the American media is trying to infuse Donald Trump with a sort of willful blindness that he doesn't demonstrate.
Whoa. Why are you... Wait. What the heck are you talking about with media? This is not media. This is John McCain. This is actual. This is Mark Warner. These are serious officials on both sides of the aisle. This is not the media. This is such a cop out.
No. The commentary around this summit tries to make Trump appear to be unprepared for this one. He's got Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Jim Mattis, the best national security team assembled in decades.
It's not the media that's saying this.
They haven't prepared.
It's our own reporting. It's people inside the White House saying it. Hugh.
The only preparation has been John Bolton going over last week and pursuing a policy that is completely the opposite of what John Bolton has espoused his entire career.
Plus, this is the point, is that it's one thing to do the spying and all the other things that Russia has been doing. But again, when it is turning Americans against Americans, and that was their point, is for Americans to not trust not just the political parties and the political institutions, but not to trust the FBI and any other institution. That, to me, is more worrisome.
And can we point out one piece of this report that you and I were talking about before the show? It also notes that among the things the Russians did was mining for Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin gets complicated, but basically what that does is you have a computer system that does incredibly complicated computations. And by completing them, the system allows you to generate more Bitcoin, which means the Russians generated money to make this happen. They literally minted money to hack our election system. Now, the president saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to ask for extradition, is stunning. If someone broke into the Bureau of Engraving and Printing and stole American dollars to commit a crime against the United States, it would be an immediate call for extradition. They are literally minting money.
There's no surprise in this. I'm just saying the Russians have been the Russians, are the Russians, will be the Russians, and everybody knows it, and we should not downplay the fact that Trump knows it too.
And the president is not categorical in saying that he will ask the Russians to extradite these men. He won't even say it. That alone is a gigantic concern that he won't stand up and say, my government is accusing you of committing a crime against our democracy. You have to act or I will.
Well, but I think Hugh's point is an important one. We should learn from the past. President Trump should learn from what happened with President Obama, what happened with President Bush, and he's not. And so advocates of Trump's foreign policy saying it's good that he's going and shaking things up at NATO and going against the grain, well, then why do we support what he's doing with Russia when it's failed in the past?
I got to make that the last point. I promise you guys get to come back here. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.